I've recently had a really big change. I moved from Calgary, Alberta, Canada to Northern Idaho in the United States. So, in this podcast of Natural Fertility with Dr. Jane, I'm going to give you a personal update of when we decided to move, why we decided to move, why did we choose the location, and just the entire process. So, the first thing that I want to address is, are there any changes to how I'm practicing? And the answer is no. I have been fully virtual since 2020. So there are absolutely zero changes to the practice. I'm now just in a different location. You can still work with either myself or one of my practitioners if you're in Canada or the US. And something that I'm thinking about is I'd love to do in-person retreats. I'm not there yet, but in the next 1 to 2 years, that's something that I would love to run. And Northern Idaho is definitely a place where I can see running a retreat, bringing couples to help them heal, to help them connect, to help connect other couples who are going through infertility and struggles, and really get to meet people in person, because I do think that doing work therapy together and yoga and breath workshops and cooking together and all of these kinds of things, all these ideas that I have, I think it's truly, truly important in that people are craving that. I'm craving that, and seeing people in person just changes. It changes and it really helps people heal. So stay tuned for that, but there are actually zero changes to the practice, which is very intentional and one of the reasons that we decided to move. So let's go to the beginning and talk about, why did I decide to move? We moved to Calgary, Alberta about 10 or 11 years ago, and I moved to be closer to family. So I finished school in Vancouver, BC. We then actually moved to Seattle for a very brief period of time, but it didn't stick because, first of all, the culture shock was a little bit much for me. I never lived in Seattle, and I kind of assumed it was the same as Vancouver. It is not. And I couldn't work. I didn't have any friends, and I couldn't work if I decided to apply for a green card within the US. And it actually meant that I couldn't leave the country either to visit family. And that just kind of gave me a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. So I moved to Calgary, Alberta, which is where my sister was, to be closer to family. I never loved Alberta's environment. I loved the people, but I figured that it would just grow on me. And then, if I wanted to travel, whether it was in the winter or even in the summer, then I could have the option to do that. Now, the people really did grow on me. I've met some really phenomenal friends, and I love the work ethic and the realness and the rawness of Alberta, but I just didn't love the actual environment. I'm not a mountain person. I am a water person, and there isn't very much water in Alberta. Now, some people might argue and say, there's a lot of lakes. What are you talking about? They're not the lakes that I'm used to, and they're not the lakes that I've envisioned. Now, when COVID hit, there was some big eye-opening things that happened that made us realize that we want options. So when COVID hit, we were running a CrossFit gym, and I had my actually naturopathic practice inside of there. I started practicing in 2015, and I was just mostly seeing actually our people who were doing CrossFit. They would come in and see me as a naturopath. And then in 2020, I decided to take the practice virtually right around COVID time. And that's when I decided to specialize in fertility as well. But essentially, once COVID hit, I realized that there is not as much freedom as I thought there was. Vaccines being one of them, and your ability to choose to have it or to not have it, and to be discriminated against or not to be discriminated against. And I was pregnant when the COVID vaccines came out with my second daughter. And I remember when the vaccines came out and they said, this is a trial run. We're just going to see if it's good. And, only basically the healthy folks, 18 to 60, I think they said, or something, you can go and get your vaccination. I was pregnant. I was like, I'm not doing a test run on anything right now. I was already feeling really skeptical. And then 2 weeks later, they essentially said it is safe and everybody not only should get it, but they have to get it then you can't do anything unless you have this vaccine. We're going to make your life really miserable. And that was really devastating to me. I actually just remember I gave birth literally like a week after giving birth, that restriction came out. And I remember just crying and being really upset that this beautiful time in my life was being taken away from me because of this, essentially negativity and injustice. So we decided then that we want some more choices. We actually decided a little bit before that, and we knew that the process would take a while. We would have to sell the gym. We knew that the green card process is probably going to be quite slow because of COVID and a lot of people trying to immigrate and things slowing down and being shut down. So we started, and literally 5 years later, I had my green card. So the process took so much longer than we expected, and we just had to jump through a bunch of hoops. There was some tax people we had that weren't good. Lawyers weren't very good. And if I can give you guys like a lesson, because, as I'm reflecting on the whole process, and obviously all of our fertility clients who have been struggling with infertility for so long, I think you guys will just be able to relate to this. But we first signed up with the lawyers that actually seemed pretty good. We had one that wasn't good, and I ended up ending it right away and, finding these guys that were local to Calgary, Alberta. And they seemed pretty good, and they got all the stuff ready, and then we were just kind of in the waiting process. But as the time went, it's like you could just tell that things were slipping and you couldn't keep the marbles together. And we had the decision to either we stay with these lawyers or we try to switch again, and we essentially pay, potentially double for what we've already paid for, just to see if we can speed up the process and not have as many things fall through the cracks, which we know will just continue to extend the process. We decided to stay because we kind of got into this mentality: when it's meant to happen, it will happen. If there's resistance, there's just resistance. There's nothing we could do about it, and we'll just wait. And if I think back on it now, I actually think it's really easy to get stuck in that trap, where sometimes resistance has nothing to do with it's going to work out when it's going to work out. Resistance is like, this isn't the right people to help you, and you need to go somewhere else. And I see this in the fertility space all the time, where couples would just sign up for these clinics, and they'll go with these clinics because they've been there for so long, and then next thing they know, they're in multiple rounds of IVF, and this clinic knows them now, but they're not getting anywhere. Or with every round, it's just getting a little bit closer, but it's like 2% closer or 5% closer. So I definitely had some gut feelings about the lawyers and when we should have switched. And looking back on it now, I probably should have acted, we should have acted on those feelings a little bit sooner, but we decided to wait because we had family there. We have, young kids. My sister has young kids. I love being close to my sister. Then my parents moved to Calgary. It made it really difficult for me to move because of family and kind of friends and community that I've built there. But what I was chasing is my nervous system regulation. I just did not feel like Alberta was my spot. And it was so hard to explain that to people that are genuinely like, what are you talking about? There's mountains here, and you can work from home, and there's all these other things that are here. And I'm like, right. And I should be really happy here, and I should be really grateful, but I just feel like I'm missing something. It wasn't my environment. And I did a lot of counseling around it, because it's like, why would I move and go through this big process when everything is just right here? The kids are set up, they have good schools, they have their swimming and gymnastics and jiu-jitsu, your sister and your mom and your family is right here. Why would you rip yourself away from this? And essentially it came down to my nervous system, that I wanted a different nervous system. I wanted a different way that I spent my weekends. I wanted a different way that I spend my day to day when I looked outside and, what I did on holidays. And maybe some of you will relate, maybe you won't. It just felt like I wasn't in the right spot. So then the question was, what is the right spot and how do we find out? So while we were waiting for my green card in these 5 years, we just got very intentional with travel, and we would figure out, and it was, I would say, mostly me. Obviously, I've talked to my husband as well, but we were figuring out where the spot is. And it's really based on feel and on vibe. And I know that sounds crazy, but every place is a vibe, and you can go to it and you can go, that's not my vibe, or you could go to it and say, this is my vibe. It could be my vibe. Maybe it was as crazy as it sounds. That's all we did, is we just traveled and we tried to figure out where we'd want to land based on our values, based on how we like to spend our time, based on how we want to raise our children. There was times where I was convinced that we were going to move to Hawaii. Now, I knew we weren't going to move to Hawaii for a long time, but I was like, maybe for a couple of years. And that was really just me screaming for freedom. And for whatever reason, when you're in the middle of an ocean, you feel like you have freedom, because you could do whatever you want. And we travel quite a bit to Hawaii just for vacation, and I love it there. But I also deep down knew that there's no way I could live here for a very long time just because of the island. I think I would feel too restricted, actually. And every time we went, I would be intentional with checking out different places. And I remember we were on the Big Island a couple years ago, and there was this woman. She literally moved from Alberta, Canada, to the Big Island like 4 or 5 years ago. She had 6 kids, and I just got to sit down and talk to her. And I was like, how did you know you wanted to move here? And she told me her story and what they wanted, and it seemed like this perfect lifestyle for her. And I was really happy for her, but I knew that wasn't the move for me. We had, we tried out BC, and we tried the Seattle and like Washington coast, because that's where my husband is from. And then his sister lived in Washington, so we would visit. And again, it's like, I remember the spot, but it's not quite what I'm looking for. And then his sister moved to Idaho in the Coeur d'Alene area, and we essentially decided to come and visit as one of the potential spots that we can move. And it was one of those moments where I remember walking up to the lake and just being like, this is it. This is the vision. This is where this is how I envision spending my summers. This is the nature that I envisioned being in, because this is the nature that I grew up in. I grew up in Russia in a small resort town where we literally swam. We just went to the beach the entire time, and it's, the tundra, so there's a lot of pines, and there's a lot of that in the Northern Idaho as well. So it just felt really right to my nervous system. And I wish there was like a magic, and it was this and it was that. It was just an accumulation of events of we want more freedom of choice. I want to be able to live off the land, and the people of Idaho really do live off the land. I went to the farmers markets. I talked to the farmers. I tasted the food. I did all of these things for the 5 years. So we traveled here through the different seasons. We came in the spring, in the winter, in the summer, obviously. We just made sure that this is something that we would like through all of the seasons, and it's not just going to be fun, for 3 months out of the year. That's how we decided. And, the process itself, in terms of there was a lot of hoops to jump through in terms of some of the finances and, owning a business and being an entrepreneur, et cetera, et cetera. There were some vaccination requirements. COVID vaccine was not one of the requirements, but your standard vaccinations requirements. So I did have to get some booster shots. I think it was the tuberculosis vaccine, because the last one I had was 10 years ago, and I think that there is that. So there's some stuff where I had to support my body, knowing that, hey, I might not agree with all of this right now, but this is what's going to get me, to the other side. And I was, you essentially have to be willing to do that. And then when we got the green card and the actual process of moving, it's it matter that you're moving from Canada or you're moving from Europe or you're moving from anywhere. It's a big move. I'm starting from zero here. We had to sell all of our cars. We just had to sell everything off. We couldn't. Importing was very expensive, and it just didn't make sense. So it wasn't easy, but I'll tell you that as soon as we got here, and we've been here barely a week, my nervous system feels already so different. So I'm really excited to take the summer to explore, to settle, to my microbiome, settle into this new environment. And where I am as a practitioner right now, and what I see kind of as my limitations, is the deeper I can help patients is my ability to be fully present with myself and to have a really regulated nervous system. So if I'm still operating from a high function, my ability to help my patients and to help my practitioners to help their patients is really limited, because of my nervous system, in the way that my kids feel me, and the way that my husband interacts with me, with the way that the world opens up to me, is essentially all connected to my nervous system and the vibration in my energy. So it was a really difficult move because leaving family is always really hard and there was a lot of logistics. But it was also one of these moves where I think if I do it, it's almost like I wouldn't heal some of my generational stuff. Meaning, I come from, we grew up in Russia. We had to grow our own food just to like survive and to eat. And I have this really big survival streak within like my DNA. And I have been really intentional about unwinding it in that this world is abundant and it's safe for me to exist. And I don't have to kill myself to make ends meet. I can enjoy life. I don't have to suffer. And it's really hard to do when it's like driven into your DNA. So this move is a really big healing component for me where I get to let go of that a little bit and say, I can enjoy life. I can unwind my nervous system and I can go, more into nature and support again my microbiome and my nervous system, and that will have a big reflection on obviously my family, but my patients, and of course you, my listeners. So that's the update. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I hope it helps you. One of the values that we have, as part of my company culture is that your environment shapes performance, but I think that your environment shapes your health. If you think about a tree, if you put it in a tiny pot and stick it in a dark corner, it may not die, but it's definitely not going to flourish. If I take that tree out, put it in a much bigger pot, water it regularly, put it in the sun, it's going to grow to be very, very, and we as humans are just like that. So I encourage you to dream big and to think about what kind of life you really want to have and why you want to have it. And then know that it's going to take you much longer than you expected, and that's okay. The end goal is going to be worth it. Honestly, this is what I walk, this is what us practitioners walk our patients through every day. It's like you're not just trying to get pregnant. You want to have a healthy baby. You want to have a healthy pregnancy. You want to have a healthy child. What you're trying to do is very different than 95% of the world. So if you feel alone, it's okay. There is truth to that. You are alone. 95% of people do not have that intention. And even though there's a bunch of people who live around us, most of them have just kind of grown up here, as opposed to me intentionally moving to this place. I have a very different appreciation for it just because I worked so hard to get here. Saying that, your environment dictates everything, and it's your nervous system that will tell you if this is the right environment or not. So some of you who feel really wound up, who feel really stuck in your nervous system, I just encourage you to go into nature, go into any kind of nature and see the kind of nature that vibes with your nervous system the most. I knew I needed water. I was like, do I need the ocean or do I need the lakes? And every time I go to the ocean, I'm like, I feel amazing, but I don't need the ocean. I didn't grow up by the ocean. And I also don't feel like there's any part of me that's like, no, it has to be the ocean that I live by, but I needed water. And so the lakes then it started to narrow where we wanted to live. Okay, I want this place, I want this climate, this is where I grew up in, and I just kind of followed that. Obviously, having family in the area really helped because we wouldn't have started to explore certain areas. But I also believe that kind of works itself. There's a coincidence to all of these things. So anyways, I hope this inspires you guys to go and do and build the life that you want. It expected to take longer than you wanted to. It'll be more expensive than you wanted to, but I think it is always 100% worth it. And you do have to follow your gut, follow your nervous system, follow your heart, so then you can get to that right place. Thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate you. And now I will be here in Northern Idaho recording, and I cannot wait to figure out the spot for when I'm going to do these retreats, because I do plan on doing couples retreats somewhere in nature here, because I think it will be wonderful. So thank you again. Stay tuned. We'll chat soon.